for the last few days. Um, I will be talking purely technical, and I hope I will be able to, kind of keep you all awake. I'll not be playing any movies or not showing you fancy pictures. Just a background about what are the transfer pricing provisions like. What was the background of the introduction of domestic transfer pricing, as we commonly call it. So, essentially speaking, at a broader level, there are two limbs of domestic transfer pricing. One is payment to specified persons, payment to related parties, as we commonly call it, which is not my topic for the day. My topic for the day is domestic transfer pricing, in as much as it relates to tax holiday units, tax holiday taxpayers, and my discussion or my presentation is based primarily on the work that I've done, my experiences of issues that we faced, and at a lot of places what I have to present as questions. I may not necessarily have answers for you. So if any of you have worked on similar matters, and if you have a viewpoint, please do share it with us. It will be a enriching experience for me also. So this is a very broad overview of what kind of taxpayers or what kind of businesses are typically eligible for tax holidays. And if this is the profile of the taxpayer we are looking at, there is a potential applicability of domestic transfer pricing. So ATIA talks about your infrastructure facilities, IAB is SEZ developers, 10 AAs, people having SEZ units. There are R&D companies, notified areas in Uttarakhand, etc. Very broadly, what kind of transactions will we be discussing today? So the first diagram, two units of the same taxpayer. So one taxpayer, one legal entity having two different units, of which at least one is eligible for a tax holiday under ATIA or any of those allied sections. So that is the one category of cases where transfer pricing would become applicable. Second category is cases where there is an external party also involved. So there are two legal entities involved. One which is the taxpayer, which has a tax holiday for at least one of the units, and there is a transaction with a third party, which is, and commonly we tend to say that if there is a close connection with that third party, then again transfer pricing provisions become applicable. So these are broadly the two kinds of transactions or two kinds of cases that we will discuss today. Why transfer pricing was made applicable to these kind of cases? So this is a very small case study on that. So in this case, the first unit is selling something to the second unit, and the scenario one, which is on the left, is the ideal pricing scenario, which is the arm's length kind of a scenario, fair market price kind of a scenario. So the cell in grey is the transaction that is subjected to transfer pricing. So where we are saying that there is a sale from one unit to the other unit, ideally it should be priced at 1,000. As a result, what happens is that the eligible unit is making a loss. So therefore there is actually no benefit of the tax holiday. The unit which does not have a tax holiday has a reasonable amount of profit, and because of which at an entity level there is a tax implication of 300. Now if this taxpayer was given a free hand and transfer pricing or any other anti-avoidance rule was not there in place, what they could have potentially done is the scenario 2, is that they could have artificially increased the price of this intra-unit transaction. So if they increased it from 100 to 2,500 in my example, the eligible unit artificially becomes profitable because of this artificial mispricing. But that profit is not taxed. So there is a zero profit on that, zero tax on that profit, and the taxable unit artificially becomes a loss-making unit, and so therefore again that also does not pay any tax. So by this artificial mispricing, the group or the taxpayer at an overall level is able to achieve zero tax. So this scenario 2 is what the government is trying to plug by introducing this domestic transfer pricing provisions, and they are trying to plug it in a more formalized manner. They have always had provisions which prohibited this scenario 2 kind of situations, but they are more formalized now. I'm assuming that everyone has a fair bit of at least the basic bit of understanding in terms of what the transfer pricing provisions are, because I mean my case studies will proceed on that basis, but in case you want me to stop or go slow or repeat anything, please let me know. So we'll straight jump into the case studies. The first case study is relates to 35 AD businesses. Now there is this provision called 35 AD which says that if you've incurred any capital expenditure, then that entire expenditure is allowed to you as a deduction. Otherwise you would go for a depreciation scenario, and that deduction will be available to you over a period of 6, 8, 10, whatever number of years. By virtue of this provision, and for specified businesses like say for example warehousing for agricultural produce and laying down of gas pipelines, those specified businesses, section 35 AD says that you will be given 100% deduction of your capital expenditure also. Okay. Now, if you look at the issue, my question is domestic TP applicable to these kind of situations? Now, very simply and very clearly, one could say that this is not covered under 80IA or 10AA or any of those sections, so it should not apply. But there is a slight twist to this, is that there is a subsection called subsection 7 to 35 AD, which says that provisions of 80IA 10 get incorporated into section 35 AD by virtue of the subsection 7. So it says that whatever provisions are contained in section 80IA 10, which includes domestic TP, those same provisions will also be applicable to 35 AD. Now in these cases, and if you look at the case study that I have given, there is a sale of machinery between connected parties, related parties, parent and subsidiary. So then, is this sale of machinery a domestic transaction, specified domestic transaction? Does it have to be reported in my transfer pricing reportings form 3CEB? Do I need to benchmark if the price of the machinery is proper or not? And the logic behind this is that, if I were to artificially inflate the price of the machinery, and because these are related parties, this company B will get a much higher deduction than what it would have got otherwise. And the objective of incorporating 80IA provisions into 35 AD also is to ensure that there is no artificial mispricing. So with this background, would anyone want to give me some kind of a view in terms of whether transfer pricing provisions are applicable or not? If you want, I can read out the
I would take a view that transfer pricing provisions would not be applicable, because we have to give a limited meaning of that incorporation. And when somebody is claiming deduction under 35D, those provisions would be applicable. Otherwise, if it was so, then by drafting the specified domestic foundation, they could have also included 35D in that. Otherwise, we have to keep the living fiction limited to that purpose. The fiction was created for the limited purpose of 35D deduction.
Okay, so sir, if you look at 80IA subsection 10, it says that in case of a specified domestic transaction, you have to go by the arm's length price. So the SDT and the arm's length price is also subsumed in 80IA 10 itself. So would you still have this same view?
Also, like the definition of specified domestic transaction includes any other provision where ATIA 10 will apply?
Any other provision in chapter 6A? That's the difference. So, my view is also the same as your view in a sense that 35 AD says that you look at ATIA 10 provisions. ATIA 10 talks of arm's length in case it is a specified domestic transaction. But the test really is whether it is a specified domestic transaction or not. And for that you go to the section 92BA, which does not make a reference to 35 AD. So therefore, my view is that in these kind of cases, transfer pricing may not apply.
What are the chances at the time of assessment whether the TP officer will consider the same view which you are holding and SAL is holding? So they always travel beyond the certain limits, even in for international domestic, international transfer pricing.
Yeah.
They always have their own interpretations.
Own interpretations, correct.
So what are the chances, fairly?
So sir, my experience, at least in this round of assessments, has been that they've been much more pragmatic in their approach as compared to what they used to be in the past. So when you put up a fair point, then more often than not they've accepted that fair point. And I think this is a reasonable legal interpretation. So if I were to advise a client, I would say that in these kind of cases you need not report. Even from the assessment risk perspective, my answer doesn't change. My answer still remains that it is a reasonably safe position to say that you need not report these kind of transactions.
Can it get covered under section 48 rupees payment made to get it?
Yeah, so
Not under the other rule.
if I was talking about domestic TP in general, I would have added that point also. And this is subject to a lot of discussion and a lot of interpretations. I have personally had a lot of discussions with a lot of people whether capital account transactions are subjected to 48(2)B. Domestic TP under 48(2)B.
Yeah, but that would have been true had it not claimed the expenditure. But in this case, it is different because it is taking the color of a revenue expenditure because it is being allowed the 100% expenditure. So in this case,
No, so I am saying that even if you discount the 3580, personally my view is that capital transactions are also covered. In a 3580, a capital transaction is taking the color of a revenue transaction, then definitely it should be covered.
under 48.
So this is the next step of a 48(2)B in a sense.
Even in the hands of B Limited, it will be reported, but not in the hands of A Limited.
A limited, it doesn't get reported.
No, be limited only.
Only B limited. Yeah.
42B.
So for A limited, it is an income. So therefore, in 48(2)B, you are concerned with expenses. So in the hands of A, it doesn't get reported. Next case study is on what all years would you consider for your compliances. Now say for example someone is setting up a power plant which will start operations in year 1, and first few years they are expecting losses, so they will actually not claim any tax holiday. Next few years they are expecting very good profits, so they are expecting that they will claim a tax holiday. In last few years they may not actually claim a tax holiday because again they might get into losses. So you have a situation where out of the 10 years where I am eligible for a tax holiday, first few years I actually don't claim the tax holiday. Last few years also I don't actually claim the tax holiday, and in between those 5-6 years I may claim it. You could have a situation, in some cases the law allows you to use any 10 years out of 15, any 10 years out of 20. A similar thing happens to those cases also. Now if I am in those first few years where I am eligible but I am not actually taking a tax holiday, what happens? So in case there is a transfer, an inter-unit transfer which is the clause 8, or an intercompany transfer which is the clause 10, whether that has to be counted in that SDT 5 crore, 20 crore limit, whether that has to be reported or not. So there are three possible options. One possible option, which looks like the more logical option, is that only in years when I actually claim the benefit, you ask me to do the compliance, because those are the only years where there is a potential where I can shift my profits or play around with transactions and try to artificially structure something. In years where I am not claiming anything, there is a question of tax evasion at all. So this is one extreme. Second extreme is to say that you have an eligible business, and if you read section 80IA, it talks of eligible business. It doesn't talk of the assessee being eligible. So an eligible business is eligible all its life, so to speak. So if this provision was to be there in the statute for 50 years and my power plant was to operate for 50 years, the second option that I am talking of is that I do the compliance for all 50 years. That's the safest position. Nobody can impose penalty, nobody can question me, nothing. The third position is that government has given me a 10-year or a 15-year or a 20-year window. Only in those years am I eligible to avail of a tax holiday. I may or may not apply for it, is a different matter, but the window available to me is only those 15, 20 years or 10 years. Third view is that I do the compliance for all of those 10 or 15 or 20 years, irrespective of whether I have claimed anything or not, actually. So, I mean, we've had a practical case and we've had a lot of deliberation on this. Anybody who also has had this kind of a case? Or anybody who would like to give a view on this?
The word eligible is there. The use of the word eligible creates a doubt.
Exactly. And the problem is that
They have not used the word deduction has been claimed.
deduction has been claimed, absolutely. I mean, if that was the usage, then it was very clear that you go by the first option. Only in case a deduction is claimed, you do the compliance, which also looks logical.
Do you mean that eligible for 50 years or only 10, 15 or 20 years?
Yeah, so I mean, as consultants, typically we find that the clients want to go with the first option because they find it logical. They would not want to go into the technical details of what the section says. Client says that, logically, if I am claiming a deduction, I agree that the government wants to ensure that, taxes are fairly paid and all of that. So you get me to do the compliances only for those years. And clients also feel that, by doing the compliance, you are trying to get more fees and all of that. So they want to obviously go with the first option. But
due to non-disclosure penalty, that is the main.
yeah, so our view that we've taken in a few cases is that we go with the third option. So because the language used is eligible business, so as an assessee, my business is eligible for those 10 or 15 or 20 years. It doesn't talk of the fact that there is a deduction which is actually claimed. So therefore our view has been that you go by the third option, and that entire life of the business being eligible as a business also and as per the law also, marry the both, and then in all of those years you do your domestic TP compliance.
Because even in the loss year, my transaction with the related party can affect my claim of computation
In the subsequent years, right?
If I am able to reduce the loss in this year, I set off in the subsequent years.
You could do that. Yeah. Sure. So, now next case study talks about close connection. Now, ATIA 10 typically talks of close connection, and it says that where you have a close connection, then ATIA 10 becomes applicable. So if you look at this structure, there are two units. One is eligible and one is not eligible. And there is a party where there is a close connection which has transaction with both these units. eligible also and not eligible also. So they could structure it in a manner that on both these legs there are corresponding adjustments made to the price. So if you reduce the price at one leg and correspondingly reduce the price at the other leg also, you are effectively managing to shift profits from the not eligible unit to the eligible unit. So there is a arbitrage available if transfer pricing was not there. So in these kind of cases, the government said that, because you are dealing with somebody with whom there is a close connection, in these kind of cases, domestic transfer pricing is applicable. Now my question is that suppose if this party in orange, the party with the close connection, was actually a third party and there was no close connection, okay, and you would find many of these cases happening in in something like a pharma industry or in something like a engineering industry, where your ineligible unit manufactures products up to a certain level, then they will give to the contract manufacturer for doing some further work or adding one process, and that contract manufacturer will then supply to your eligible unit from where you will make the finished product. So this is a very common, typically used example in a lot of industries. Yeah, so coming back to my question is that if this party at the bottom was actually third party doing actual business, in these kind of cases, under ATIA 10, would domestic transfer pricing be applicable?
I think in this particular fact, close connection is established because the goods are coming back to me.
Okay.
Payment, assessee says, units are separate.
Right.
So through a third party, department would say, duct only through which you are transferring the goods back to you.
Yeah, department could say that, but what will be your advice on an independent basis where you understand that this is not a dummy entity, this is an actual business that is happening and there's actual business need. This process which this person is doing is not available in-house, so they have to employ somebody to do this process, and they could have involved 10 such contract manufacturers at different units or at different locations.
If this unit 2 is selling the goods to this party in yellow, it's lower than the market price. I don't think it's problem with that. If it is selling
So the question is, do you need to establish that or do you need to test that? So whether it is selling at lower or higher or equivalent price does not determine whether transfer pricing becomes applicable. Transfer pricing becomes applicable irrespective. I mean, even if your pricing is fair, transfer pricing provisions become applicable. Then you have to benchmark and then you have to prove that my pricing is fair. The question is whether it applies itself or not. Do you need to actually test whether the pricing is lower or higher or equivalent?
But I would say if there was an integrated contract with the third party, that I will sell it to you, you will do the processing, you charge this much, and then you will sell it back, ship it to this unit. I would say a close connection is established.
Close connection is established.
I will not take a risk on this.
Sure. Okay. So,
There is no as yet, this issue has not been tested.
not tested, absolutely.
But since the GAR is introduced, I think one can take the benefit of this type of situation by avoiding and not reporting.
By not reporting. Okay. So, sorry.
One question that we could ask is what is unit 1 doing in this entire transaction? If it is merely buying and selling further with hardly any value add, then why wouldn't that third party give it back to unit 2 as a job worker and unit 2 sell it to customers directly? Why can't that happen?
Okay.
So what is the role of unit 1 will also make a difference to whether it is a close.
Okay.
I would say, Gaurav, I would take the view from the definition of associated enterprise. I would say it is a pre-arranged transaction. Because in the definition, even if the parent company is arranged with a third party vendor, and the Indian entity buying from the third party, and the terms and conditions fixed by the parent company, which is a
similar
international transaction with the associated society. I would take it through from there, and I would start on the right.
Link the transaction with as to whether can be identified whether more than ordinary profits have been earned in this transaction, because even that word is linked to their close connection. If it results into more than ordinary profit, so in this case, because transaction is on the debit side, there is no question of earning more.
There are transactions on both sides, no? One transaction is on debit side, other one is on credit.
Yeah, but the eligible unit is the purchasing unit. So
Yeah, so sales or purchase, anything could affect your profits.
yes.
Yeah, so my
More than ordinary profits point has to be shown.
yeah, so it could be more than ordinary, no? If the prices are suppressed.
That has to be tested practically.
So my analysis and my view is that close connection is irrelevant. You actually need not look at whether there is a close connection or not. And I mean, I took this case study because my observation has been that people talk of close connection only in ATI 10 cases. Now, what the section reads is where it appears to the assessing officer that owing to the close connection between the assessee carrying on eligible business and any other person, or for any other reason, the course of business between them is so arranged that it gives more than ordinary profits to the tax holiday. So the point is, you need not have a close connection. But if for any other reason, the course of business is so arranged, in this case, clearly I would say that the business is so arranged that there is a chance or there is a potential for shifting of profits from the non-eligible to the eligible unit. So because of this, I would undertake transfer pricing compliances here. Now again, taking this to the next step from what he said is that what is the transaction that I will report? Because the transaction which is happening with the first unit, unit 1, is that sale of goods from the third party to unit 1. Whether I report only that transaction, whether I report only the purchase transaction, or I should report both. Sorry, you said report both. Why?
Because because one leg is will be close connected parties.
Yeah, so I don't report only that leg.
ATIA transaction has to be reported.
ATIA transaction has to be reported.
So only the purchase transaction.
Purchase transaction.
Only the purchase by the unit 1. So 92BA, which talks of domestic transfer pricing, which is like the charging section for domestic transfer pricing. Following transactions are covered, and out of it, it says any business transacted between the assessee and other person as referred to in subsection 10. So any business transacted is any business transacted which has the potential of shifting of profits and all of that. So my view, personal view, is that the business transacted which has a potential of profit shifting is not that one leg with the eligible unit. The business transacted is both those legs put together which had the potential of profit shifting. Personally, my view is that both transactions should be reported. Now, how do you identify those transactions as a 3CP auditor is a completely different question. I have not been able to find an answer to that. But you will ask the client for a list of related parties, you would look at AS18 list, you would look at associated enterprises definition, but very difficult to find out these kind of names and report them as associated enterprise in your Form 3CP. So practically we face this challenge, and it's been very difficult to actually identify these kind of
Similar to what happens with the deemed AE.
deemed days. Absolutely.
See, the disclosure obligation is on the assessee.
Correct.
So if the non-disclosure risk in such cases is not on the auditor, but it is on the assessor.
Sir, from an income tax standpoint, yes. But from the CA Regulations Act, I mean, some risk is also there on the auditor, right? And if you look at the certification, that also, I mean, if you looked at the third paragraph of that Form 3CB, it says that the particulars given in the whole form are true and correct. So if you have to talk about a true and correct view, then, I mean, there is some risk which is also placed on the auditor in these cases.
Auditor can do only due diligence to find out.
I agree.
If something is suppressed from him deliberately, actively.
No, so something being suppressed is another matter. But I'm saying, how would you talk to your client and ask for these kind of cases? Very difficult to explain such things to the client.
If the
I mean, practically, I feel.
if the auditor is also involved, say he is also a statutory auditor of the company associate as a whole, then he would know. He would be familiar with the business of both the
Business,
entities,
yeah.
and he would know.
So you have to have a very good business understanding and exactly understand how they operate. Even if you are not the statutory auditor. I mean, if you are just doing the transfer pricing audit, even then you will have to get into a lot of details of the business structure per se. Okay. Another example is this B is an eligible unit and it has taken a loan from the parent. So just taking off this loan, whether it is a transaction or not. So from our earlier slides discussion, you know, we may want to say that this granting of loan has a potential of shifting of profits depending on how much interest is charged. So suppose some interest is actually charged. In terms of reporting, what is the specified domestic transaction? Because the loan per se, loan in itself does not affect my profits. What affects my profits is the interest component of the loan. So I would consider the loan and the interest both as specified domestic transaction. I would cover only the interest as a transaction. What do I do if no interest has been charged? Do I say that the value of the transaction actually is zero? If it falls below 5 crores, domestic transfer pricing not applicable. What is the stand that I should be taking? The interest. The interest. Okay.
Whether we apply the definition of international transaction also for the purpose of domestic transaction?
No, sir. You can't.
Because
They have given a very detailed list also, but you can't do that because specified domestic transactions there is a separate identified list. So in case no such list was available, we could have taken recourse to the international transactions list, but the list is available now. Transactions, specified domestic transactions are defined. So again, because the section talks of business transacted, so the loan and the interest on the loan both will form a part of the business transacted in my view, and both of them should be reported.
Don't you think by adding capital which we have received from the parent company, it will add to that 15 crores limit and ultimately our file will go to the TPO? By not writing means ultimately we are adding our what we can say transaction value only by reporting the capital like a issue of share capital in case of earlier session.
Right.
So don't you think that it is not necessarily to be reported? Only the revenue expenditure is only to be reported.
Okay, so I'll ask you the same question in a different manner. So suppose the value of the loan was 200 crores, the loan per se, okay, and you are charging 12% interest on it, and you are actually charging that, right? So the interest amount comes to 24 crores. You are anyway crossing your 20 crore and 15 crore limits. So now what would you do? You would report only interest, or would you report both?
That's why capital what we have received in the capital expenditure or capital receipt is not to be reported. As far as my view is concerned, only the revenue expenditure will have to be.
Okay.
And
So
suppose I am also not sure about what if the loan is given interest free, then there should not be any revenue expenditure.
any disclosure at all?
Yeah, I am also not sure about it.
Yeah, so I mean, let's look at the first question first. On a standalone basis, is that if you report only the interest, what happens is you've already crossed the threshold,
Correct.
right? And your case will anyway be scrutinized. So in this case, do you want to be safe from penalty and say that, my case is anyway going to be scrutinized? There is no harm in reporting the loan part per se, so may as well go and report. Because if you don't report, there is a possibility, howsoever remote that possibility may be, okay? To my mind, it is a very live possibility, is that the department would want to apply a 4% penalty for non-disclosure of transactions. So would you want to report that or no?
But the question is, in international transaction, debit and credit, what will have to report? But until the time, till today, in case of SDT, only debit side is only reported.
No. SDT only in 48UB cases you have to report one leg, which is only the debit leg. In
Yeah.
80IA 8, 80IA 10 cases you have to report both legs. Revenue, the debit part and credit part both. In fact, what I am saying is something which is not a P&L item because of the language that has been used. Any business transacted as per 80IA 10. So to my mind, the loan itself also is a business transacted which needs to be reported. Now this thing gets further complicated if the loan was taken 5 years back and it is still outstanding in your books. So if you look at it, technically there is no transaction of loan being given in the year, during the year, which is the requirement of your Form 3CV. So in those kind of cases, if you are not charging any interest, or the B company is not paying any interest, then I think technically the way the law is worded, you need not do any reporting, because the threshold is not crossed. But assuming the threshold was crossed because of some other transactions, then this will have to get reported to say transaction of interest, actually charge 0, ALP 12%. That's fine.
Of course, on a conservative basis, I agree with you. Notwithstanding that, I would like to add that for penalty, we have a very strong ground that says I am reporting interest. Right? Loan has to be benchmarked by simple. Right? When I am reporting interest, there is no penalty to be said that I have not maintained any documentation or there is no non-disclosure. So the penalty can be what I feel is the remotest possibility. That when you are reporting interest, you already benchmark the underlying transaction by reporting interest. So how you can say that not even maintain documentation for the loan itself? So suppose if I agree if there is nil interest charge, right? Then you can say okay, since there was no interest charge. Right?
Yeah, but the implication is also on the interest
Anyway.
then, what you are saying. The implication and the penalty, if any,
Right.
is on the interest only. It can't be on the loan amount, is what you are
So
saying.
that's what I'm saying.
Right.
If we don't report loan, right, there cannot be a penalty. That's just on that ground, penalty level down.
Yeah, so there are different shades to this. So suppose the amount of loan was 30 crores and you are paying a 3 crore interest on that. Then would you say domestic TP is applicable or not applicable? That will be the question.
So on the conservative basis, you might report the 3 crore rupees thing, right?
Even if the total
Yeah.
falls below 5 crores, you will still
Yes,
report it.
yes, the reason being the form doesn't give us the note, where we can write that this was on the 30 crores of loan which we have given. If that would have been available, right, then the matter would have
Then
been
life
easy.
would have been
Yeah,
very
life would.
easy.
But yeah, on the conservative basis, I would report 3 crores. But just, of course, I said that I agree with you to report 30. But on a penalty thing, what I feel is could be very easily avoided.
Okay, sure. Thanks. Thanks, sir.
Going further in that any transaction part, so would that mean even repayment of this loan will have to be reported? That would.
I would assume so. If I am taking a stand that the grant of loan has to be reported, then even the repayment has to be same logic. Assume that this B Limited was not a subsidiary of A Limited. They had no business relationship, nothing, and still there was a 0% loan given. Then can the officer come around and say that the business is so arranged? We saw in the earlier thing that close connection is not required. You have to have a business which is so arranged as to give a shift in profits. So clearly in this case they are showing higher profits because they are not paying interest. So can the department then come around to say that the course of business is so arranged in your case, even if the parent subsidiary relation or any other relationship is not there, still you have to report this transaction? Or to make it similar to a actual third party situation is that suppose there was a comparable available which had a 12% interest, and I was able to procure a loan from A Limited at only 8%. So that 4% actually is my saving, because of which I am showing a higher profit and claiming a higher tax deduction. Can then the department say that we'll deny you that extra 4% deduction?
Then there is no relationship between the two companies, question of it does not happen.
So, but the requirement of having a relation is not there.
Yeah, it is.
Now I am saying you don't have to have a relationship to fall under 80-10. It says by virtue of close connection or for any other reason, the business is so arranged that B is getting more than ordinary profits. So I don't have an answer to this personally, and fortunately I haven't had this kind of a case. But if this kind of a case comes up, I think the stress is to see whether the course of business is so arranged. Exactly. So there is a difference between saying that I am conducting my business in a normal course and I am able to negotiate a better rate, in which case the course of business is not so arranged. Course of business being so arranged, I mean, the connotation that I would take is that there has to be something more than what is obvious here. There has to be some other element to this transaction also, because of which I would say it is so arranged.
No, but
One transaction.
sorry to interrupt, but in such a case, if it is a third party and there is no close connection, why somebody will give a interest-free loan to a party? There has to be a logic behind it. Because some benefit is coming to me in some form, otherwise there is no economic benefit. I would not enter into this transaction.
No, so that is why I modified that example to say that what if 8% was being charged and the arm's length price was 12%. So you could have a very good situation where A Limited had extra money and no avenues to put in the money, and I was able to negotiate a good rate. And this happens in actual life third party situations also, is that if I have a better bargaining power, or if I have better negotiation skills, I'm able to get better rates for myself. So there is no yes or no answer to this situation, but I think this has to be examined in some more details to see whether there is an arrangement element to this or not. This comes up very often, this whole structure, and this is typically the case with pharma companies, and you have a couple of decisions also on this, is that there is a head office and there are units. Some units are eligible, some units are not eligible. What happens is that there is an existing level of work that is happening in these individual independent units. The head office says that I am not happy with the level of work that is happening. Why don't we look at newer products, improvement in existing products, we want to cure new kinds of diseases. So the head office takes up the role of doing the R&D for the group. So unit A, B and C could be producing products A, B and C respectively, and the head office is doing R&D. R&D may fructify or not fructify. Suppose it is fruitful, then they may come up with a new product E. So in those cases, can the department again say that head office is only the head office, it doesn't do any manufacturing activity? Finally, the manufacturing has to be done by one of the 3 units. So then, should this R&D expense be also allocated amongst the 3 units? Because of which what will happen is, the eligible unit will show a lower profit and claim a lower amount of tax, and this will be subjected to domestic transfer pricing and compliances and all that will follow.
I don't think this will fit into the provisions of ATI 10, because if you want to apply the reverse ratio of Pandian chemicals, the unit which is claiming ATI very fit is not manufacturing a product which is subject to research. Okay? So if a product activity is distinct and the expense is not considered, there is a question. It's a reverse application of Pandian chemicals, where I am saying that interest is disallowable for the new unit. Similarly, this unit is not manufacturing the product which is subject to research.
Okay, so thanks for that insight, sir. And there are direct decisions on this also. The decision of Chandu Pharma, Cadila Healthcare, where also, the fact pattern was very similar. Department went on the ground and they picked up on this thing that you mentioned, that the R&D expenses are not linked to any of the units. So that's the ground that we are discussing, right? Department said that the assessee has only 3 units, unit A, B and C. Suppose there is a new drug discovery as a result of the R&D, it will have to be manufactured in one of these 3 facilities because that's the only option the assessee has. So you can't artificially segregate the R&D just because I'm not sure what will happen to the results of the R&D tomorrow. And therefore they wanted to segregate the R&D expense and allocate those to unit A, B and C. In both, and these are the only 2 decisions that I am aware of, in both these 2 decisions the court said that you don't have an evidence to say that if and when R&D is fruitful, it will result into manufacturing by A, B and C. I can give that R&D, my technology to somebody and earn royalty as a head office. I can do that. So if my R&D were to be successful, that would translate into manufacturing is an assumption which the department is making without any underlying documentation. So they rejected the department stand. They went actually with the stand that you mentioned, is that what the head office is doing is completely independent of what the units are doing. And you have to actually analyze the other facts. So for example, in these facts, the units also had their own independent R&D facilities.
And another could be, suppose I am manufacturing for the US market, my production facility is totally separate. I am manufacturing the same product for the Indian market.
Absolutely.
So for US market, the facility is a 5-star facility.
Sure.
So if I will decide to where what is the market once the research is complete.
Yeah, so these decisions were on the products per se, but for whatever reason, if you are able to substantiate that this is not connected to the eligible unit, then you can take a claim that no allocation is required for the R&D. What happens to the common costs which are incurred by the head office? Now, a lot of this will actually pertain to the units. So something like a statutory auditor's fees. Statutory auditors charges fees for the whole business put together, which also includes these units. ROC filing fees. So there are a lot of these expenses which are common for the business, which are booked in the books of the HO, but they actually pertain to the head office also as much as the individual units. So question is, do you need an